It was the spring of 1978 in Santa Rosa, California. The kind of town where the air smelled faintly of redwood and ocean salt, and where Main Street still closed early on Sundays. The year had brought a wave of change to the country. Disco was fading, punk was crawling into the mainstream, and in the Bay Area, a younger generation was pushing against the quiet, conservative order of their parents. For Lisa Marie Turner, life felt wide open. She had just turned 20 that February, the youngest of 3 daughters in a close-knit family. Lisa had a laugh that rolled out of her chest like warm summer air. Her mother said you could hear it from across the street and know instantly it was her. She was the type who remembered everyone's birthday, even casual acquaintances from high school. She volunteered twice a month at the animal shelter, brushing out the matted fur of abandoned dogs, whispering to them like they were old friends. Her dream was to move to San Francisco and work as a photographer. She already carried her Canon AE-1 everywhere, snapping candid shots of her friends, the local skate park kids, and even her father reading the morning paper by the kitchen window. On the afternoon of April 14, 1978, Lisa had plans. She'd promised to help her friend Monica pick out a dress for an upcoming engagement party. She had a shift at her part-time job later that evening at the Harbor Cafe, a small diner near the old railroad tracks. She left her parents' house just before 3 p.m., wearing a light denim jacket over a sundress printed with tiny yellow daisies. Her camera hung around her neck. She told her mom she might be late coming home because Monica wanted to grab dinner after shopping. Her mother smiled, told her to be safe, and closed the door. That would be the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. When Lisa didn't come home that night, it didn't set off alarm bells at first. She was 20, independent, and often stayed over at friends' apartments in Santa Rosa or Petaluma. But by the following afternoon, with no word from her, her parents knew something was wrong. Lisa's bed was still made from the morning before. Her work apron was neatly folded on her desk. She hadn't shown up for her shift. By evening, the Turner family began calling hospitals, friends, anyone who might have seen her. No one had. Lisa's father, Richard, drove through the streets of Santa Rosa until past midnight. He checked the mall parking lot, the roadside diners, the quiet rural roads on the edge of town. Nothing. By the third day, a cold knot had formed in her mother's stomach. Lisa wasn't the type to vanish. Not without calling. Not without letting someone know where she was. Her friends said she'd been in good spirits, talking about her photography portfolio and her plans to apply for an internship at a San Francisco paper. Monica, the last friend to see her, said Lisa never made it to the dress shop that day. Somewhere between leaving her parents' house and meeting Monica, Lisa Turner disappeared. The impact rippled through Santa Rosa. The Turner family had lived there for decades, everyone knew them. People whispered in the aisles of the grocery store, stared too long in church pews. Teenagers who once walked home alone now asked their parents for rides. Strangers locked their doors earlier. For Lisa's sisters, the days became unbearable. Her older sister Michelle described it years later. It's like the air in our house changed. We all still breathed it, but it was heavier, stale. Every clock tick was a reminder that she wasn't coming home yet. Even now, when friends remembered Lisa, they spoke first about her kindness, her photographs, her infectious laugh. But in 1978, they would soon be remembering her for something else entirely, something far darker. Because just 3 days after she was last seen, a jogger would stumble across something on a quiet trail outside town. And Santa Rosa would never be the same again. April 17, 1978. It was early, the kind of morning when fog still clung low to the hills, turning the world a muted gray. The Fountain Grove Trail, just north of Santa Rosa, was usually quiet except for the rustle of deer moving through the brush and the occasional cyclist. At 7:14 a.m., Jim Weaver, a 34-year-old accountant training for a local marathon, started his usual route. The trail was damp from an overnight drizzle, the air sharp with the smell of wet pine. His sneakers crunched over gravel and soft earth as he kept pace, the sound of his breathing steady in his ears. About 2 miles in, Jim noticed something off to his right. At first, it was just color, a flash of pale fabric tangled in the undergrowth about 20 feet from the path. He slowed, thinking it might be a discarded blanket or someone's lost picnic sheet. But as he stepped closer, a sick feeling began to knot in his stomach. It wasn't a blanket. She was lying face up, her body partially hidden by ferns and blackberry brambles. Her sundress, the one patterned with yellow daisies, was torn. Her camera was nowhere in sight. One shoe was missing. There were dark bruises around her neck. Jim froze, the sound of his own pulse roaring in his ears. The air seemed to still around him. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, with trembling hands, he fumbled for the payphone at the small ranger station half a mile down the trail. His voice cracked as he spoke to the dispatcher. I think I found a body. A woman. She's not breathing. Please, you need to send someone. Santa Rosa police units arrived within minutes. The first on scene was Officer Carol Hughes, a young patrol officer who would later say she could still remember the metallic tang in the air, that faint, unmistakable smell of blood mixed with damp earth. The area was quickly cordoned off with yellow tape, but the fog kept drifting in, curling around the officer's legs like ghostly fingers. The quiet was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional murmur of radio chatter and the snapping of branches as more responders arrived. Detectives moved carefully, cataloging the scene. One of them, Detective Frank Donnelly, crouched near the body, eyes narrowing at the bruising pattern. He noted a jagged scrape along the victim's right forearm, as if she'd fought back. Her purse was missing. So was her camera. The medical examiner on scene whispered the preliminary observation: manual strangulation. They wouldn't confirm her identity until dental records matched, but in Detective Donnelly's mind, there was no doubt. This was Lisa Turner. Back in town, word spread faster than the official notice. A man who'd been walking his dog near the trail told a neighbor, who called her sister, who worked at the bakery. By noon, customers were whispering in line. They found her. Up in Fountain Grove. God, that poor family. When police officially notified the Turners later that day, Lisa's mother collapsed in the living room, her body folding as if gravity had doubled in an instant. Her father stood rigid, staring at the floor, hands clenched at his sides. For them, hope didn't fade, it snapped. By nightfall, the story was on local news. Grainy aerial shots showed a stretch of trail marked by police tape, the camera panning over still forms of officers in the mist. The anchor's voice was flat, almost clinical. Authorities confirmed the body discovered this morning in a wooded area north of Santa Rosa is that of 20-year-old Lisa Turner, reported missing 3 days ago. Police are treating the death as a homicide. No arrests have been made. The town was stunned. Santa Rosa wasn't supposed to be the kind of place where young women were murdered and left in the woods. And yet, there it was, undeniable, on every television screen in town. The quiet hum of safety that had defined life here had been shattered. And in the coming days, the investigation would take twists no one could have predicted. The morning after Lisa Turner's body was found, Detective Frank Donnelly sat at his desk with a styrofoam cup of burnt coffee, staring at the crime scene photographs. Lisa's face, pale against the tangled greenery. The deep bruises encircling her neck. The torn strap of her dress, the bare patch of ground beneath her where the struggle had been most violent. The MIS preliminary report gave them a rough timeline. Lisa had likely been killed sometime between late afternoon and early evening on April 14, the same day she vanished. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Toxicology results were pending. The location of the body raised more questions than it answered. The Fountain Grove Trail was secluded, but not entirely hidden. It was a known jogging route, frequented by hikers and dog walkers. Whoever killed her had either taken a huge risk, or had known the area well enough to pick a spot with minimal foot traffic. Detectives began retracing Lisa's last known movements. Her friend Monica Ruiz was the last confirmed person to speak to her before she vanished. Monica told investigators that Lisa had called her just after 2:30 p.m., saying she'd be leaving her parents' house shortly. She never made it to the store, Monica said, her voice breaking. I waited an hour at the dress shop before I gave up and went home. A neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Drake, thought she might have seen Lisa walking down Maple Street around 3:15 p.m., heading toward downtown. But her account wavered under questioning. She admitted she wasn't wearing her glasses at the time. More promising was a report from a gas station attendant named Ray Hollister, who claimed he saw a young woman matching Lisa's description near the corner of 4th and Mendocino around 4 p.m., getting into a dark-colored pickup truck. Older model, Ray said. Maybe a Chevy. Had a dent in the passenger door. It was the first tangible lead, but it came with problems. Ray couldn't be sure it was Lisa, and he hadn't caught the license plate. In the first 48 hours, investigators developed 3 main lines of inquiry. A stranger abduction. The attacker could have been someone passing through, a drifter or transient who happened upon Lisa and seized an opportunity. Santa Rosa had seen a small uptick in transient traffic along the nearby highway. Someone she knew. Statistics favored this theory. Strangulation often indicated a personal connection, an up-close and prolonged act requiring rage or familiarity. A serial pattern. Quietly, Donnelly considered whether Lisa's death might connect to other unsolved murders in the region. In the early 1970s, the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders had shaken the area. At least 7 young women were found dead in rural parts of Sonoma County between 1972 and 1973. Officially, those cases were cold. But Donnelly couldn't ignore the similarities. By day 5, the pickup truck lead fizzled, no one else had seen it, and no vehicle matching the description turned up in DMV records connected to anyone suspicious. A tip from a caller claiming Lisa had been seen at a roadside bar in Petaluma proved false. The woman in question was alive and well, and bore only a passing resemblance to Lisa. Detectives interviewed Lisa's co-workers at the Harbor Cafe. Most described her as kind, reliable, and not the type to get mixed up in anything dangerous. One co-worker, however, mentioned an incident a few weeks earlier, an older male customer who had become a little too interested in Lisa, hanging around her shifts, leaving notes on napkins. The man's name was Gary Winslow. He was in his mid-30s, divorced, and worked at a local machine shop. When questioned, Winslow denied knowing Lisa outside the cafe, claimed he was home alone the night she disappeared, and said the notes were just friendly. He had no visible injuries, no criminal record, and, at least at that moment, no evidence directly tying him to the crime. Donnelly didn't like him. But without more, Winslow remained a person of interest, not a suspect. The Turner family, meanwhile, was living in a haze of grief. Reporters hovered outside their home, shouting questions they refused to answer. Lisa's mother stopped opening the curtains. Her father spent hours in the garage, avoiding the living room where Lisa's photos still covered the walls. At the department, Donnelly felt the pressure mounting. The trail was already cooling. In 1978, without surveillance cameras, without cell phones, without DNA testing as we know it today, solving a homicide depended on one thing: people talking. And in Santa Rosa, people were talking, just not always to the police. Because while detectives chased leads, the town's rumor mill had already started grinding. And some of the stories making the rounds were as dangerous as they were false. In small towns, grief doesn't stay quiet for long. It spreads through church pews, grocery store aisles, and school parking lots, transforming into something else: fear, suspicion, and eventually, rumor. By the week after Lisa Turner's murder, Santa Rosa was a different place. Parents who used to let their kids ride bikes until sunset were now calling them in before dinner. Teenagers who had spent summer nights wandering Main Street in groups now stuck to lit sidewalks or stayed home entirely. And in the cafes and laundromats, people whispered. At Harbor Cafe, where Lisa had worked her shifts, customers spoke in low voices over their coffee. "They say it was someone she knew," one woman murmured, glancing over her shoulder. "No, I heard she was grabbed by a stranger, same guy who's been lurking near the high school," another countered. The waitress taking their order said nothing, but later told detectives she'd overheard at least 3 different versions of how Lisa died, each more graphic and less accurate than the last. Downtown, the gossip shifted toward naming names. A group of men at the barbershop speculated about the pickup truck sighting. "Bet you it's that guy Gary Winslow," one said. "Always was a little off." "Nah," another replied. "I think it's that drifter who camps by the river. Nobody's seen him in a week." Rumor had become its own investigation, and in some ways, it was moving faster than the real one. At Santa Rosa Junior College, where Lisa had taken night photography classes, students huddled in corners between lectures, debating theories. Some insisted the killer was a stranger, a dangerous man passing through town. Others whispered that Lisa might have been seeing someone in secret, someone older, married, and desperate to keep it quiet. One classmate, Janice Farrow, told a reporter she thought Lisa had been followed weeks earlier after class. "She laughed it off," Janice said. "But I saw a guy leaning against a street lamp, just watching her get into her car. Never saw his face." That detail never made it into the official case file. It was too vague to chase. But it added fuel to the fire. For the Santa Rosa Police Department, the chatter was a double-edged sword. Every rumor they investigated that led nowhere burned precious hours. But ignoring them risked missing the one that might hold truth. Detective Donnelly found himself fielding calls from citizens convinced they had the answer. Everything from overhearing an argument in a parking lot to finding a suspicious grocery list in a neighbor's trash. The pressure was suffocating. Local papers ran headlines like "No Suspects in Turner Murder" and "Killer Still at Large." Editorials criticized the department for failing to protect our daughters. Every unsolved day chipped away at public trust. For Lisa's family, the whispers were an added cruelty. Michelle, her older sister, said later, "It wasn't enough that we lost her. We had to hear people speculate about her life, about what she was doing that day, like she'd done something to deserve it. It was like losing her twice. Her parents stopped attending church services. They declined interviews. When a news crew parked across from their house, Richard Turner walked into the driveway and told them, voice steady but eyes wet, "You will not film my wife crying. Leave." By mid-May, women in Santa Rosa were walking in pairs, keeping keys clutched between their fingers as they crossed parking lots. Hardware stores reported an uptick in padlock and deadbolt sales. One local radio host even ran a nightly safety tip segment, ending each broadcast with, "And remember, the killer could be someone you pass on the street every day." For Detective Donnelly, that line stuck. Because behind the rumors, the half-truths, and the wild guesses, he knew it was possible, probable, that Lisa's killer was still here, blending in, listening, maybe even helping spread the very rumors that kept police chasing their tails. And as May turned to June, the case was no closer to being solved. Which meant something that no one wanted to admit aloud. This could become another one of Santa Rosa's unsolved tragedies. By the end of summer 1978, the file on Lisa Turner's murder had grown thick with interview transcripts, crime scene photos, and dead-end leads. The pickup truck sighting? Nothing. The obsessed customer, Gary Winslow? Questioned repeatedly, alibi holding firm. Anonymous tips? They'd ranged from the bizarre, one caller claimed Lisa had been killed by a satanic cult in the Redwoods, to the impossible, with suspects proven to be hundreds of miles away at the time. The investigation slowed. And in a homicide case, slowing meant dying. By early '79, Lisa's story had all but vanished from the front pages. The Sonoma County paper ran a brief article on the one-year anniversary, but the words felt hollow, "Case remains unsolved. Police urge anyone with information to come forward." For the Turner family, the disappearance from the news felt like a second loss. Michelle, her sister, put it bluntly. It was like the world just moved on. But we didn't. We couldn't. The Turners marked each April 14th quietly. No vigils. No speeches. Just the four of them, until Lisa's father passed in 1985, lighting a candle at the kitchen table and leaving one of her photographs in the center. Her mother, Ruth, kept Lisa's room untouched for years. The bedspread smoothed, her camera on the desk, a roll of undeveloped film still inside. She once told a reporter she could never bring herself to finish it. "It feels like, if I develop it, I'm closing the book on her. And I'm not ready to do that." For Detective Donnelly, Lisa's case became one of those files that never really left his desk, even when he was working others. Every few months, he'd reopen it, reread statements, make a few calls. Sometimes, he'd drive out to the trail where her body was found and just stand there, as if the trees might finally decide to talk. But in the pre-DNA era, cold cases were cruel in their inertia. Without new witnesses or confessions, the file sat a day. In 1986, Donnelly retired, leaving Lisa's murder in the hands of younger detectives who inherited a stack of cases like this, unsolved, aging, heavy with the weight of time. By the 90s, Santa Rosa had grown. Strip malls replaced orchards. Subdivisions sprawled into once quiet farmland. Many of the people who'd whispered about Lisa in '78 had moved or passed away. But for those who remembered, the unease never quite lifted. It wasn't just that her killer had never been caught, it was the idea that he might still be here. In the grocery store. At the post office. Living a perfectly ordinary life. By the early 2000s, a small ember of hope relit. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, were making headlines. Old cases were being solved using evidence that had sat untouched for decades. In 2005, a new cold case unit formed in Sonoma County, tasked with reviewing long unsolved homicides. Lisa's file was one of the first on their desk. In a dusty evidence locker, they found a sealed box from 1978 containing the items collected from her body in the crime scene: her dress, her shoes, hair samples, scrapings from under her fingernails. Back then, they'd been catalogued, but the technology to fully examine them hadn't existed. Now, there was a chance. It would take years, funding, backlog, and bureaucracy slowed everything. But the idea was planted. Maybe, just maybe, science could do what witnesses and rumors never could. And then, in 2018, 40 years after Lisa's death, a new piece of technology would change everything. The year was 2018, 40 years after Lisa Turner's murder. In a sterile lab at the Sonoma County Crime Lab, forensic scientist Dr. Karen Mills stared through her microscope at what seemed like an ordinary swab of dried skin cells collected decades ago. Back in '78, investigators had scraped beneath Lisa's fingernails, hoping to find something, any clue about her attacker. But the technology to analyze that material simply didn't exist. DNA profiling was still in its infancy. Now, with the power of advanced STR, short tandem repeat analysis and a vast national database of genetic profiles, Dr. Mills was ready to give those old samples a fresh look. The process was painstaking. The decades-old evidence was fragile, contamination was a constant risk. But by late spring, the lab extracted a clean DNA profile from the scrapings. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The profile was uploaded to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. Within days, the system flagged a match. The DNA belonged to a man named Dennis Morgan. Morgan was a local resident of Sonoma County, born in 1950, with a history of petty crimes but no prior violent offenses. He'd never been a suspect in Lisa's case before. His name had not come up in any initial interviews or police records from 1978. But his DNA was a direct link, undeniable. The killer had been hiding in plain sight. Detective Sarah Benson, the lead investigator on the cold case unit, recalls the moment she got the call. It was surreal. After all those years, after so many false starts, we finally had someone. It was both thrilling and heartbreaking, because it meant Lisa's family could finally have some answers, but also that this man had evaded justice for decades. The unit moved quickly, reopening the file with fresh eyes. They combed through old records and followed new leads. Morgan's employment history, known associates, and whereabouts on April 14, 1978, became the focus. Documents revealed Morgan had worked at a nearby lumber yard just 5 miles from Fountain Grove Trail. He owned a dark-colored pickup truck, matching the description from that gas station attendant. His alibi from '78 was thin, largely based on unverifiable claims. No witnesses had connected him to Lisa before, but a re-interview of surviving friends revealed they'd never been comfortable around him. Monica, Lisa's friend, remembered him always watching from a distance, but had never thought to tell police. Morgan was arrested quietly in early June 2018. His reaction was one of cold denial. He insisted the DNA was planted, a conspiracy against him. But the evidence was overwhelming. As the news broke in Santa Rosa, the community grappled with the shock. 40 years had passed, but for Lisa's family, the arrest brought a mix of relief and a fresh wave of grief. Lisa's mother, Ruth, told reporters through tears, "I waited 4 decades for this moment. For justice. But nothing will bring my daughter back." With Dennis Morgan in custody, the investigation took a sharp turn. What had once been a cold file now brimmed with questions, and the answers began revealing a darker picture than anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Benson and her team prepared for long hours in the interrogation room. Morgan had maintained his innocence at booking, but DNA evidence left no room for doubt. During the first session, his defenses cracked. He admitted knowing Lisa but claimed their encounter was brief and consensual. He said they had spoken near the lumber yard weeks before her disappearance, but denied any involvement in her murder. His story was shaky, details inconsistent. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered troubling links. Morgan had been obsessed with Lisa for months before her disappearance. Co-workers recalled him talking about a special girl he hoped to impress. Payroll records showed he had the afternoon off on April 14, the day Lisa vanished, contradicting his earlier claim of working late. Witness statements placed a dark pickup truck near the trail on the afternoon of the murder, matching Morgan's vehicle. More chillingly, an old letter found in his belongings contained rambling, possessive writings about Lisa, revealing a disturbing fixation. Using the combined evidence, detectives reconstructed the timeline. Lisa had likely encountered Morgan near the trail while walking home or returning from Monica's. A confrontation escalated into violence. The scars on her arms, the bruises on her neck, signs she fought to escape. Her camera and purse were taken, either as trophies or to hide traces. Morgan's attempt to hide the crime succeeded for decades, until the DNA proved otherwise. News of Morgan's history spread fast. Friends and neighbors who once saw him as quiet and unremarkable now faced the harrowing reality that a killer had lived among them. Monica Ruiz, Lisa's friend, reflected, "We never saw this side of him. It makes you wonder what else went unnoticed." The fragile sense of safety in Santa Rosa shattered once again, but this time with the hope that justice would finally be served. Confrontation and arrest. It was early June 2018 when the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department quietly prepared to arrest Dennis Morgan at his modest home on the outskirts of Santa Rosa. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the quiet neighborhood. Officers in plain clothes arrived silently, their unmarked cars pulling into driveways and side streets. Morgan, a 68-year-old man with a graying beard and unassuming demeanor, answered the door unaware of what awaited him. Detective Sarah Benson read him his rights as Morgan's face twisted from confusion to anger. "You have the right to remain silent," she began, her voice steady but cold. Morgan attempted to interrupt, denying everything, claiming the DNA evidence was fabricated, a witch hunt, he called it. But the officers were prepared for his denials. Handcuffed and escorted into the squad car, Morgan's eyes darted around, the calm mask slipping for the first time in decades. Hours later, in the stark, windowless interrogation room, the weight of the moment began to crush him. Detective Benson laid out the evidence: DNA matches, timeline contradictions, witness accounts, the letter revealing his obsession. Morgan's voice faltered. He shifted uncomfortably under the glare of the fluorescent lights. I didn't mean for it to happen," he finally whispered. "She was just there. I wanted to talk, but things got out of hand." His confession was fragmented, vague, but chilling. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had stalked Lisa, driven by obsession and jealousy. The confrontation on that April afternoon had spiraled, hands tightening around her throat in a deadly rage when she tried to break free. He had fled, leaving her to die alone in the woods, hiding her camera and purse to erase evidence. 4 decades, Morgan had lived with the secret, confident the crime would never catch up to him. When news of the arrest and confession became public, Santa Rosa was gripped by a mixture of relief and renewed grief. At a small vigil held near the trail where Lisa's body was found, friends, family, and strangers lit candles and shared memories. Michelle Turner, Lisa's sister, spoke through tears. "It took 40 years, but finally, we know what happened. My sister's name can be cleared, and her memory honored." Trial and justice. The courtroom was packed the day Dennis Morgan's trial began in late 2018. The air hung heavy with anticipation and decades of pent-up grief. Lisa Turner's family filled the front rows, their faces pale but resolute. Local residents, reporters, and survivors from other cold cases watched quietly, hoping justice would finally be served. Prosecutor Maria Jenkins spoke with calm intensity, outlining the case. "This is not just a story of a young woman taken too soon. It is the story of persistence, of science and determination overcoming fear and silence. We will prove beyond doubt that Dennis Morgan took Lisa Turner's life." Defense attorney James Calloway immediately challenged the evidence, arguing that contamination and degraded samples left the DNA evidence unreliable. "We must remember that this case is built on evidence collected over 40 years ago, and that casts reasonable doubt." Several witnesses took the stand. Detective Sarah Benson recounted the painstaking investigation, detailing how forensic advances unlocked the truth decades later. Dr. Karen Mills, forensic expert, explained the DNA extraction and matching process in clear terms, emphasizing the integrity of the evidence. Monica Ruiz, Lisa's closest friend, described Lisa's kindness and dreams, humanizing the victim for the jury. Her voice shook as she spoke. The prosecution also played a recorded interrogation where Morgan's confessions, fragmented but chilling, were heard by all. Calloway tried to chip away at the prosecution's case, questioning the reliability of decades-old evidence and suggesting alternative theories. But the strength of the DNA link, coupled with Morgan's own words, left little room for doubt. The defense's attempts to introduce character witnesses mostly backfired, as Morgan's quiet obsession with Lisa became a central theme. In a powerful moment, Michelle Turner addressed the court. "For 40 years, our family has lived in the shadow of this pain. We have waited for answers, for justice. Today, we hope for closure, for my sister, Lisa." The judge's eyes glistened as the courtroom fell silent. After 5 days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Dennis Morgan was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge called the case a testament to justice delayed but not denied. Resolution and reflection. The courtroom emptied, but the echoes of the trial lingered in Santa Rosa. For the Turner family, the verdict was a bittersweet relief. 40 years of unanswered questions had finally met justice, but the wounds remained raw. Lisa's mother, Ruth, said quietly in an interview, "No sentence can bring her back. But knowing the truth, finally, it gives us a piece of peace." Healing in the community. Santa Rosa began to heal, slowly. The city held a memorial in Lisa's honor, planting a tree near the Fountain Grove Trail as a symbol of life continuing even after loss. Local law enforcement revamped their cold case units, inspired by the breakthrough, committing to never let cases fade into obscurity. Victim advocacy groups saw a surge in support as survivors and families found hope in Lisa's story. The passage of time. Detective Sarah Benson reflected on the case. This taught me that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it can come. It's about never giving up, even when the world moves on. The story of Lisa Turner became a beacon for the power of persistence and innovation. Her photographs, once packed away, were finally developed and displayed in a local gallery, reminders of a vibrant life cut too short. A new beginning. Though grief would never fully leave, the Turners chose to celebrate Lisa's legacy. Her sisters started a scholarship fund for young photographers, ensuring her passion lived on. Santa Rosa, once shadowed by fear, began looking forward, with cautious hope and a commitment to protect its children. But as the dust settled, in the final moments of the investigation, officers found a small, unmarked envelope hidden among Morgan's belongings. Inside was a cryptic note mentioning another name, one linked to a nearby unsolved disappearance from 1976. The hunt wasn't over. Just as the Turner family began to find closure, a discovery in Morgan's possessions sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Inside a forgotten box, tucked beneath old tools in his garage, was an envelope, unmarked, aged, and sealed with a faded fingerprint. Within it lay a single folded photograph, a young woman, smiling softly, standing in front of a faded motel sign. No name. No date. But what caught Detective Benson's eye was the handwritten note on the back. For her silence, she paid the price. The woods keep their secrets. The note pointed toward a previously unsolved disappearance, one that had haunted Sonoma County since 1976. The woman had never been found. Was Morgan responsible for more than one tragedy? Questions swirled in the cold air. Had he been living a double life? Were there victims no one had ever known about? And most haunting, could there be others still waiting to be found? As investigators reopened that shadowed chapter, Santa Rosa braced itself. The past was far from buried. And the truth, however dark, was still waiting to be uncovered.